I think we'll give it one more minute. I see that we're letting people in from the waiting room, so we'll give this about 60 seconds here. All right, I think we're ready to go. For those that don't know you, my name is Joe Staley. I'm one of the co-chairs of the in-house section for the State Bar of Georgia's Intellectual Property Law section. We're real excited today about a panel we put together. We have a virtual roundtable here today for you to talk about some of the IP trends that we've seen, some of the business realities that have kind of emanated from the COVID-19 pandemic that's been plaguing us for the last year and a half or so. So with that, let me get started and introduce today the folks that we're gonna be presenting. First off, Allison Daniso, she's my co-chair on the IP section's in-house committee. She'll be the moderator today. Allison is the legal team leader at Avalon with tons of experience in all aspects of intellectual property. And before going in-house, she has been at several firms locally doing IP litigation and various other intellectual property work. So we're very excited to have Allison today moderating this panel. We've got Clark Wilson. He's the business unit lead counsel at Avanos Medical in Alpharetta. Before that, Clark has been at a few firms in town. He was a partner at Gardner Groff with me several years ago, and that's where we met. And he's also after that was senior counsel at Merchant & Gould. We're excited to have Jessica Lewis on board today. She's litigation counsel for the Coca-Cola Company. And prior to working at Coca-Cola, Jessica was a senior associate with the firm of Alston and Bird. And last but not least, we got Justin Ward. Justin is the vice president of legal at Daniel Defense. Registered patent attorney, 15 years of experience. Again, very, very well experienced in all areas of IP. We're really excited to have Justin with us today as well. And now before we kind of jump into the roundtable discussion, one of the things that we had put together, and it's in the slide presentation I think everybody here will get, is some IP statistics that we pulled off the USPTO's website that kind of highlight some of the effects of COVID at the USPTO and the effect on patents. And so first here, we'll just jump through a couple of these. We won't go through all of them right now, but one of the ones we wanted to highlight for you is if you were wondering what effect applications or COVID-19 had on applications, I think this slide is impactful to show that as of May of 2020, the USPTO was getting somewhere in the order of magnitude of 50,000 applications on a monthly basis. And you can see that as of April of this year, a year later, we're looking at close to 600 to 650,000 applications are receiving on a monthly basis. So that has really steadily ramped up in the last 12 months. Inventory has grown and ballooned to 625,000 applications pending review. And you can see here statistically that this is the production units coming out of the examiner's corps. And you can see that that effort has had to ramp up corresponding to the high number of applications that have become filed. Same thing with design applications. We'll skip through some of the stuff again. This was just, we wanted to make sure the information was in the slide presentation. Looking at some of the trademark data that we were able to pull together for you, you can see that first office action pendency in the last several months has crept up and has exceeded the USPTO's target. But interestingly, one of the things that we noted was that applications have actually been pretty consistent across the board through COVID. So it doesn't, while pendency has crept up, it doesn't look like the applications have deviated very much. So with that, after just kind of like throwing that at you, Allison's going to take over and kind of walk through the panel on some of these statistics and a good bit more information on how COVID-19 has affected these businesses. And so with that, Allison, I'll turn it over to you. And again, thank you for moderating the panel today.
Thank you, Joe. And I would like to reiterate and welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. I guess the first question is just a follow-up to the statistics that we just looked at. And I'd like to ask the panel, I mean, how have you seen within your businesses, the applications rise or fall for your intellectual property?
Hi, this is Jessica. I guess I can start. I think that the trademark slide really showed that the number of filings has been sort of stable over the last year or so. And while I'm currently litigation counsel, so I don't really work super closely in the trademark space, but I've talked to our trademark counsel about this. I think it's consistent with our business too, that the applications have stayed pretty steady on the trademark side. We really haven't seen much of a dip. And I think that that sort of reflects the way our business has been run. I think we all sort of had this sort of shock when COVID started. And at the company, we wanted to really focus on some of the core brands just initially to sort of see where COVID was going. But since then, we've had some, pretty significant launches of various products like Topo Chico Hard Seltzer, Smart Water has a new line, Honest has a new line. And so there is still a lot of innovation, a lot of development. And when that happens, I think there's naturally IP filings associated with it.
And Justin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think Jessica did a good job, and I think that's similar to what we had. We had a slowdown when COVID first hit. We had less applications, less innovation. So what we did, we tried to get creative, and we bought patent portfolios, but 2 sets of patent portfolios, and that really helped us drive innovation during these slow times. And now we're starting to pick up again, and the engineers are back in the office, and innovation is starting to come back up, and filings have definitely gone up.
That's great. Clark, how about you?
So I had our IP manager run a report for me recently on these statistics, and our numbers of filings and also of invention disclosures, to be honest, reduced dramatically within 2020 as opposed to 2019. We're starting to see the wheels turning again for 2021, but 2020 for us, because of the way our business is structured and because of the kind of products that we offer, and we may get into that in a subsequent question, but we really had to put a lot of resources into one aspect of the business to meet demand. And so that meant maybe less resources that were going towards new innovation. So 2020 for us was a shifting of focus from a business standpoint, maybe away from IP generation and more towards revenue generation.
That leads into my next question, which is to ask each of the panelists, how has COVID affected your business? But we're going to look at it both internally and externally, but let's start with internally. And Jessica, can you tell us how has COVID affected Coca-Cola's business internally?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a huge pivot when COVID hit us. We all of a sudden left the office. I think we all thought we'd be heading home for just a couple weeks and then coming back in, and here we are over a year later and we're still home. And we went from, I think, an internal business relationships where there were a lot of face-to-face meetings and in-person meetings to being fully remote and working out of our homes. I think that the company's always sort of had the technology to do video conferencing and things like that, especially because our operations are international, but I don't think we used it heavily, especially for people that were local. And there was sort of this immediate shift to using Teams for now every call. So every call now is a video call. And I'm curious to see as we, I know we're going to talk about it later, but get back into the office if some of that stays.
And how about externally? How's it affected your business?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, as you could imagine, since our products are pretty ubiquitous, we sort of went overnight to having a lot of our major customers close down. So sporting events, theaters, restaurants, things like that. And so our business really quickly had to shift from fountain-based drinks, which sort of closed down, to a lot more bottle can. And it's funny because even though the sales on the fountain side were going down, obviously our bottle can sales were going up as people we're at home and having in-home consumption and stocking up on things. I don't know the exact number on it, but I think that there's some statistic about how much orange juice has been bought. It's sort of like a record year because all of a sudden people are home and having breakfast with their families, and orange juice is sort of a natural part of that. So there's definitely been some change in the way our business looks. I do think as things open back up, we're getting sort of back to normal. And I think especially probably in the last year, 8 months to a year, our innovations have sort of continued at the normal pace they continue. So I think we're sort of back to normal as you can be at this point.
And Justin or Clark, how about the two of you?
Sure. At Daniel Defense, we have, we sell to military, law enforcement, domestic, internationals. We're considered an essential business. We had to stay open during all of these times. So we had to come up with challenges to make it safe for our employees to come in. So we set up different protocols to, temperature checks and tried to have the non-essential workers stay home and, utilize Microsoft Teams and do everything we can, to keep everybody safe. So we continued through it and we worked on our challenges and tried to do the best we can. But there's only so much you can do because you can't, employees outside of work, do stuff. So we did see people get sick here and there, but it definitely affected our business internally.
And Clark, let me ask you this one. How has COVID affected the way your business innovates?
I'm not quite sure it's affected the way that we innovate. We innovated in the sense of how we run the business, not necessarily in the traditional sense of technology innovation. Obviously, the big obvious one that everybody's already mentioned is my life is run by Microsoft Teams at this point. I look at the calendar, it's just a series of calls all over the place, sometimes very late at night, depending on who I'm speaking to and what part of the world. And I happen to have had a pretty positive experience from it. Sometimes when you're in-house in the legal department, that's not really somewhere that the non-legal people just kind of like pop by just to say, how's everybody going? They tend to avoid the legal department. But because of Microsoft Teams, I think it has made people more comfortable just reaching out just informally or having a conversation. And so I feel like I've developed deeper connections and relationships with other people in the business because of that. As far as an R&D type of innovation, I think it's improved our project management in a sense, because everybody's now not just able to have access to the management software, but they're kind of forced to check it now. So they're forced to stay up to date on things, forced to make sure that they're meeting their deadlines. And it's also given people more flexibility in meeting those deadlines. So whereas maybe before within a 9 to 5 in-office schedule, you may get distracted from staying to a calendar. Now you may be able to pick something up late at night, early in the morning, on the weekend. And so I have found that the pace of things getting done has accelerated a little bit more. And I'm kind of shocked at the amount of things that amount of projects that we were able to close in 2020, even in spite of us not being in the office.
Well, so and I'd like to ask Justin, I mean, when we talk about innovation, we're talking about adaptation. With more people being outside of the office, do you find that there's any intellectual property or confidentiality issues that come up with the remote workforce?
Yeah, we do our best. We have NDAs and we remind people to do the best they can with the where they're at with their computer and make sure there's no data privacy issues. But yeah, we did notice the slowdown in IP filings and innovation. So we try to come up with new programs to incentivize the engineers that we're working on to get them to come up with new ideas. And even if they don't think it's an idea, to share, we can evaluate and set proper protocols in place. So overall, we've adapted. It was slow to start and we're coming through it and things are going in a positive fashion.
Yeah. Well, talking about adaptation, I guess, Jessica, can you tell us what Coca-Cola is doing? Are you all working remote? I mean, what right now is the work environment for you?
Yeah, so I guess at headquarters in corporate, we are for the most part working from home, except some more essential employees like our lab folks, things like that, who are coming in. Obviously, our plants are still open, and those kinds of things are sort of normal business operations. But for the vast majority of us, we are in corporate all working from home right now.
And what do you plan to do in the future?
So that we have heard talks that we are going to reopen in Q4, but I think I think some of this remote work and flexibility is here to stay. And so I think while we were sort of a typical, you're in the office 4 to 5 days a week, I think there'll be a lot more flexibility as we come back into the office later this year.
And well, and Clark, for example, is your company going to be doing any type of hoteling?
Yeah, so that's the plan. I mean, I like to say that I haven't even been to my parking lot of my office since March 6th of last year. And we're not slated back to go to the office at earliest September of this year. And so there's been a task force looking at how people like to work, how it's been effective, how to set it up in the future. Because just looking at numbers, we have 4 floors of our building, and they've basically given away one of those floors. So we now only have 75% of the space that we had before. And so they have put people into categories of must come in all the time. And that's largely the R&D folks, because they have to have the lab. Then there may be some that are completely remote that may just come in from time to time, and they'll have some kind of a hoteling fashion. And then there's some in the middle, a flex situation, which is probably where I'm going to be, where you can come in anywhere from 1 to 3 days a week, and you may have your own desk, or you may have a desk share situation. So that's likely where we are headed. That's at least what's been reported.
Yeah. And that's where, Justin, can you explain that? Can you better define the term that I just used, which is hoteling? What does that entail? And how does that impact the in-house legal teams that are being put together?
Sure. For us, it's a little different. We built a brand new facility, and we have all the offices and all the cubicles in place. So we have places that we can go. We don't have it where we have, people come in all the time. So we have like Clark has, the essential people come in 5 days a week, and then the non-essential, we try to, do it on different days. So everyone's not in the same areas, and have social distancing and all the good stuff.
Do you want me to, I can probably talk a little bit more about hoteling. We use that term so loosely now because I think a lot of us like Clark see it, but it's essentially that you don't have a desk, you're sort of hoteling. When you come in, you find a place to work, and that's sort of your workstation for the day. I think there's sort of different ways of doing it, and I'm not sure how Coke is going to do it when we end up coming back, but in some situations you have like drawers that you can use to store your stuff for when you come in. Some people have lockers. Some people do desk share, where it's a couple different people that use the same desk. I think I'm curious to see how it plays out for legal, and I imagine that they will kind of group all of the legal folks together. So maybe we'll have like a floor devoted to us, but when you come in, you don't have an assigned seat, is sort of where I imagine it's going to be.
Yeah, we definitely don't do that. So that's why I was wondering what you're talking about with hoteling. So.
Yeah. Well, are there any other ways that the organization has had to change, both with COVID, what's going on right now, and what you anticipate happening in the future?
Yeah, one thing that I can talk about that we're doing differently is, at least in the marketing department, how we're innovating. So typically with our business, we'd have trade shows where you'd have to go and show up. There'd be, 100,000 people that attend. People were getting sick before the COVID, just being around all the people. So we had to change the way we market. So COVID, has canceled the majority of the shows. We're trying to come up with new ways. We're finding new social media platforms like Reddit. I had no idea what Reddit was, and now we're doing Reddit, and we're doing everything we can. We're doing Facebook Live to get out to our customers. And it's just a different way that we're approaching the marketing side of things. Has been effective, and it's kept us up with the times, and it's working. And as a result of that, we're coming up with new trademarks and new things that we're trying to protect.
Well, that's kind of a good way to move into, I mean, how COVID and now the emergence from COVID, how has that impacted the enforcement of your marks or of your intellectual property?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, it's remained the same. We've enforced our marks. Most of the cease and desist letters have been very effective. People have backed down because they don't want to do the litigation. So nothing has changed for enforcement. We enforce everything that we can to protect our IP.
Yeah. Jessica, how about you for litigation? I mean, how has COVID and also
Yeah.
now emerging from COVID? Yeah,
I would say that I don't think our strategy has changed really in any way. We have not seen really a slowdown in filings of lawsuits generally against the company. I think there was, as far as sort of how litigation was proceeding, there was a sort of short lull when COVID happened, because I think everybody was in that kind of what is going on for a few months period. But very quickly thereafter, most of our cases are back on track. Discovery's back on track. We, a couple months ago had a Ninth Circuit oral argument that we did remotely. So we're seeing a lot more remote hearings that are coming up. I do wonder if some of that, especially scheduling conferences and things like that, is here to stay. But we've also, interestingly, in different jurisdictions, it sort of varies a little bit, but in some jurisdictions, we anticipate that our cases are going to sort of be pushed to the back of the line just because there's such a backlog of criminal cases that are waiting for trials and waiting for judges' attention. But I think in some jurisdictions, civil cases have already come back. And I think we've already had, I wasn't working on this case, but there's already been one trial that the companies had recently, which, it's sort of shocking to get people together in a room with a jury and, witnesses. But I think people are sort of wishing and hoping that we can move back to normal slowly.
and Clark, do you have anything to add? I mean, what's going on with your business?
I don't think I've noticed any real change from previous to COVID to now as far as the enforcement is concerned. I think that maybe people in various parts of the globe who may have otherwise been occupied with just pure selling or relationship building maybe have had more time to come up with more creative ways of controlling their marketplace. And so I may get more emails and calls about potential infringers. Say, hey, what do you think about this? I'm seeing this, especially out of Asia, most specifically in China. It's on a monthly basis. I'm getting emails from our APAC group about infringers and knockoffs on various websites. And so we've had to basically put an entire program into place to streamline that, because there was just so much of it coming out of Baidu, the Baidu website and otherwise. So that's maybe something that's new that's come up in the enforcement sphere. But the actual litigation that we had before didn't seem like it was slowing down at all. And we actually initiated a new lawsuit right in the middle of COVID. And it seems to have already concluded. And so things don't seem to have slowed down for us at all.
And that's sort of shifting back to Jessica there for a second. And did you find that the access to courts, did that impact how you manage litigation, or how you proceeded in the management of your litigation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I don't actually think there was really much of an impact as far as access to courts, like minus that first initial bump when the courts were kind of trying to figure out what was going on and they were closed and how things were going to be handled. Things have kind of just been moving right along. Like judges are ruling on motions, ruling on discovery disputes. And so I don't know that there's much that we could leverage about the situation to either help, or there's not much that would hurt us, because I do feel like it's sort of business as usual with the courts. Minus the fact that a lot of our hearings and stuff are remote, of course.
Well, and Justin, that's a question for you as well. I mean, how do you feel that COVID's impacted that basically business decisions in terms of how you're managing litigation?
Yeah, we definitely have to be creative. On the litigation side of things, we had many cases that are already in place. And we've noticed that we had a couple motions dismissed, and those were ruled on, almost immediately. So the courts are, doing less and less hearings. And I think some of the criminal dockets are being put on hold. So some of these other cases are moving through. So we've actually noticed that the cases are going through pretty quick. And what I thought was really interesting is one of our cases, the court has like a YouTube page, and they broadcast the hearings for everybody to watch. I thought that was really interesting.
So the next topic we're going to talk about is data privacy, and really how the data privacy has become important or impacted your business. Clark, let's start with you. I mean, what has the data privacy implications become, or the challenges that you faced with the remote work environment that you're in?
So prior to the Colonial Pipeline issue, we have regular mandatory trainings for all staff members, all employees that's required. And one of those throughout 2020 was a data privacy, and it was, how to use your computer, how to use your phone and things like that. But then after the Colonial Pipeline breach recently, it's gone into overdrive. And so we've had a mandatory data privacy and cybersecurity training with our internal cybersecurity task force. And you had to pick one meeting, but you get all the invitations. And so there must have been 20 that have gone out. We're getting almost weekly notices for data privacy. Most of it focuses in on the fact that we are in a remote situation. People are working from home. People are working maybe from coffee shops or restaurants if they want to go out. So, making sure people turn on their VPN, making sure you don't leave your computer on when you're not using it, being down to like looking over your shoulder to make sure nobody's looking at your computer. So there has become a much more concerted effort for data privacy. We now have a new privacy council within the company, which spans across the different regions of the globe, which is going to push forth new policies for the company. So data privacy has become very much at the forefront of the business.
And Jessica, how about you? What's your answer to that question?
Yeah, I mean, I would just second everything Clark said. I think that the company, that Coca-Cola has always taken privacy very seriously, and we've always had pretty robust training platforms and exercises that people are required, mandatory training that they're required to do. And I think that that's just continued during COVID. There's been some slight tweaks reminding people about sensitivity at home, using platforms like Zoom and some of those things. But I think it's very much continued pretty effectively too. So I think we're in good shape, but I just sort of second what Clark was saying.
And Justin, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I would third what Clark had to say as well. We have lots of training after the Colonial stuff, and we have safeguards in place when everybody's working from home. And that'd be awesome to have a data privacy council on board.
Yeah. Well, so my next question really is just generally within the work group. Do you, either maybe Justin or Jessica, how do you anticipate with businesses coming back? Are they going to still require masks be worn? Do you anticipate vaccinations will be required or will be mandated in any way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think right now for people that come into the office, they do have to get their temperature scanned. There's some of those sort of basic requirements. We do have a team of folks that are sort of working on how we get people back into the office. I don't have specifics on it, so I don't know if masks will be required or anything of that sort. But it will be interesting to see how it plays out. I know there's a lot of discussion in CLEs on the issue right now. And I think everybody's just trying to get up to speed and sort of figure out what the best course forward is.
Yeah, same with us. We have, make sure everybody gets a temperature check when they come through the guardhouse and, wear your mask. And on the mandatory vaccines, I don't know if we could do that under the privacy and whatnot. So, we don't have anything like that in place. And, like I said earlier, is you can do the best you can with the people that are in the facility, but when people go home and do, different things, it's hard to control what they do. And so you have to put the safeguards in place at the facility and try and make it as safe as possible for everybody to come.
And Clark, how about you?
Yeah, so we sent out a survey to all the employees to ask about vaccination, who's been vaccinated, and if you haven't been vaccinated, do you plan to? And we got a pretty good response. I think something about 85% or so responded. Of those that responded, something in the neighborhood of 70% said that they had been vaccinated. And of those who hadn't yet been vaccinated, it was less an indication that they weren't going to, and it was more of, well, I just don't know when I'm going to have time to do it. And so we then, knowing that you can't force people to get a vaccination, I think we've instituted some incentives for people to get vaccination, some even financial incentives for people to get vaccinated, because we do have a mandate to wear masks when you come in. There's a protocol and there's weekly training on how to enter the office that you can attend. You have to receive approval from your manager to actually enter the building. So they're taking it very seriously, and that will likely continue. I think after at least part of that will continue after we reopen the office.
Yeah. And I do have a question here. I was going to say to all the attorneys who are attending, if you have any questions, just put it into chat. But the first question is from Brad Goff. And if I could find you, I'd unmute you so you could add, but we've got quite a few people in attendance. So his question was, he's curious to hear if anyone on the panel has found ADR options such as arbitration or mediation to be helpful if courts have been bogged down during COVID.
I mean, on our end, I don't know that I've seen it as being necessarily helpful, but I will say that cases that were in arbitration or that were headed towards arbitration, that path has continued. We were planning to have an arbitration, one of our matters, remotely. It didn't actually end up going forward, but I was curious to see how that would play out with a number of witnesses. And I think we had 3 arbitrators in that panel. And I think mediation, as a part of our litigation strategy, I don't think that that's changed, right? And I think it's sort of stayed the same. Can I add one thing that I was going to mention just to your last question, Allison?
Sure.
So one interesting thing about coming back to the office, and I think I meant to talk about this earlier, is that one change that's happened during COVID is that we have a lot of new hires who aren't necessarily local at this point. So when we think about coming to back to the office and when we open, I think there's going to be sort of this new group of people that aren't necessarily Atlanta based. And I'm hearing from sort of my friends in the IP space who've moved around or gotten new jobs recently. There's a lot of companies that are doing that in this market where we need people and you have to continue hiring, that there's a lot more remote hiring going on and hiring done without ever actually meeting a candidate face to face, which is kind of definitely a new world change. And I'm curious to see how that sort of plays out as things open back up.
Yeah. And so is that both international or nationally? So you're finding them not necessarily to be in the Atlanta area, right?
Yeah, and I don't have any examples of folks that are international right now that would normally sit in headquarters. But there are definitely people that aren't based in Atlanta but are in other places in the U.S. that have been hired into roles that typically would sit here in Atlanta.
Yeah, and remind me, when did you say that you thought Coca-Cola would be going back to work?
We're looking like, I think Q4, September, October, that time frame. And I think it's going to be sort of staged. Legal, being the essential folks that we are, might be towards the tail end of it, but we'll see. So I think it's sort of the process would start around that time frame.
Yeah, and you are anticipating some type of a remote environment after that.
I think so. Yeah, I think similar to what Clark said, we're probably going to have groups of people. So people that are in full time, people that are home full time, and then people that have some sort of mix of 2 to 3 days a week at work.
Yeah. And Clark, is that true for your company as well? Are you finding more remote or more potentially permanently remote people being hired nationally, internationally within your company?
Yeah, I mean, we routinely get notified of new hires by department heads, and on this, when you're in-house, you have this software called Success Factors sometimes, and it teaches you all about your role and who's getting hired and things like that. So we get notified globally of new hires, and there are people that are hired all over the country, and some of them have plans to move to Atlanta. Some of them are maybe hired into a role that they'll be able to stay there. I know of one example. I mean, we have a senior leader, a member of the senior leadership team that was hired in Minneapolis, and he may at some point move down to Atlanta, but he's not there now. So yeah, it's definitely happening. And I don't see any drawbacks. I haven't seen any problems with it yet. So seems to be working.
Yeah, and for us, we're extremely busy and we're growing our workforce. And a lot of the new candidates, we're having problems getting the talent out here. We're hiring in different areas of the country. There was initially an expectation that these people would come and move to Savannah when everything slowed down, but it seems that other companies are giving these remote opportunities. So I think it's gonna be very hard to get people to come and move unless they wanted to, of course. But so I've noticed a trend that remote is here to stay, and it's actually a bargaining tool when you're getting hired on with the company.
Yeah. And are you taking any steps to, or are there any changes in the steps that you will take to protect and protect your intellectual property?
For us, it'd be the same. We just what we do is yearly training. We have yearly training on IP and compliance, and obviously it's going to change this year and next year, and we do everything we can to protect our IP and make sure our we have some engineers in different areas. We put safeguards in place to make sure that they're protecting the IP, they're not disclosing and whatnot. So.
Well, good. So my next question really for I guess would be for Clark, and back to the innovation question, is if you're going to have a continued or a potential continued remote aspect to your work environment, do you think that will generate any internal or external innovation in terms of the way that you're handling the office meetings, or things that you're going to be providing to your customers?
I certainly think that people they've been forced to accept the use of Microsoft Teams, but we're now past the forced uncomfortable phase where I think people just use it. And I think they've found it to be helpful and effective. The chat feature is really great. Especially when you're working with people in different time zones. Being able to, one little thing that I like about Teams is being able to put a document into the chat feature with 10 different people, and then it will just maintain the most updated version. Everybody can edit the same version. And so it makes it really easy to redline a document as opposed to passing it around and trying to figure out which one's the latest and greatest. Like, that's just one example of something new that's been really nice to come out of this. I know that our sales staff, a big part of being in sales is getting in front of the customer. And so they were really the first line of people that we tried to get back into work. We had to do a whole project to get them PPE around the globe. That was the middle of the summer of last year, because they needed to get into the hospitals and talk to the customers. So I think that their type of job and the way that they perform their function is probably going to go back to normal as it was, because a big part of it is getting in front of the staff at the hospital, the doctors, to be able to work with them. For the rest of us, the hoteling function, maybe only going in for certain meetings. I think that our office, the way that it's going to be set up, is less individual desks, more multi-person meeting rooms, with the idea that they like the positivity from all these Teams meetings as opposed to individual conversations. So they're just going to try to replicate that in person if possible. But then all of these rooms will all have, full TVs and everything, so that if you can't come in, you're going to be participating seamlessly. So I think that's probably what I envision is going to happen. And that I view that as a positive.
So, and sort of the last question to wrap up before we open it up for questions, just generally or globally rather, Jessica, what has been the biggest impact with COVID on your management of intellectual property litigation for Coca-Cola? And how do you think our emergence from it is going to will affect you going forward?
So I really still think that the way we manage our litigation and our intellectual property really hasn't changed in terms of strategy. But I think what has changed is how we approach it from an office perspective, right? And I think that I think is really what I see as sort of the sustaining change, which when I say that, I mean how we interact with our peers, how we interact with our outside counsel, these Teams calls, right? That not everybody's in the office all the time. We're not flying around to sit in on hearings or go to depositions. So much of that is remote. So while I don't think necessarily our strategy will really change, I really do think that the way we do our job has changed, and some of it will stay. On the Teams front, I was laughing when Clark was talking about how people just use it so much now and it's just sort of automatic. And for a while, I felt like you just automatically turn your video on because that's what everybody expects. But there's a group of us at work that always talk about you should be empowered to leave your video off. And I feel like that is very true. Like you should not feel obligated to turn your video on just because you're on a call. And I think we've sort of shifted now from everybody being on video all the time to actually people now, some on video, some on just the phone. And I think even that I think has been a good flexible change.
Yeah, well, and just to follow up on one thing you had just said, which is, how it has changed your interaction with outside counsel. I mean, I gather you mean that you work with outside counsel who are also now working remotely, right?
Yes.
And in terms of hiring counsel, does it impact the geographic location? I mean, does the geographic location of your counsel, is that become less important with the hybrid remote structure?
I mean, I think it's now we sort of treat that differently, but of course, like really what drives geographic selection of counsel is typically where the dispute arose or where we think the case is going to end up or where a case has been filed against us. And that doesn't change. But, typically we see our counsel a few times a year, whether it's at hearings or depositions, or they just come into the office for a visit. And, we haven't seen anybody in person in well over a year yet. You still have to find a way to still stay connected. And one big change, I think, is when I talked to outside counsel before, it was always over the phone. And now often we see them on video calls. So you're actually seeing more of them in some ways, just not in person.
Yeah. Well, and Justin, same question. I mean, what has been the biggest impact of COVID, on your intellectual property practice? And how do you see it changing, the emergence from it, I guess, establishing a change that may take place or cement going forward?
Yeah, for me, my practices remain the same. It's just me at Daniel Defense. So I do work with the different departments. IP is only a portion of what I do. So there's always things to do. If I'm in the office or I'm working remotely, things are still getting done. Like Jessica mentioned, selection of outside counsel, we're still moving forward, and it's mostly for new counsel, it's location driven. So we have a matter in, a new lawsuit in a different area, then we'll reach out to someone. But practices remain the same, and we've just adapted. I mentioned earlier that innovation slowed, so we bought 2 patent portfolios. But you get those 2 patent portfolios, and you still have to prosecute them. So there's still ongoing applications. So things remain the same, super busy, and it's exciting time. So.
And finally, Clark, I mean, I would think your business has had the biggest impact from COVID. And I mean, your company's business, your client's business, but what was the biggest shift you saw? And is there anything going forward that you think will change?
I mean, from a business standpoint, we have 2 portions of our business. One of them is really geared towards pain management in elective surgeries. So if you want to Google search the Game Ready machine, it's used by a lot of professional athletes, people like that, to manage post knee operation pain and things like that. That side of the business is on elective surgeries, and it fell to nothing during COVID. Our other side of the business has a respiratory component to it, and we make the closed suctioning equipment that go with respirators to sort of remove phlegm and things like that from your lungs to help you breathe easier when you're on a respirator. That side of the business was gangbusters, so much so that it's been on back order, and that's been sort of sustaining the revenue of the company, really. And so we had to shift our focus early on in coronavirus to basically say we are going full bore on making sure that we can get our supply of these respiratory products to all the various customers around the globe. And some of this was coming from Mexico. Our main plants are in Mexico. And so it was a daily update on how our employees are doing in the factories in Mexico. What can we do to make their lives easier? So there was a lot of focus on making sure the supply chain was maintained on those particular products, and the rest of the stuff may have fallen by the wayside for a period of time. I don't know if Justin and Jessica experienced this, but early on in coronavirus, maybe around April timeframe, I started to see an inundation of requests, letters, and information about a little used contractual clause called force majeure. And I was then, required to sort of become the expert of force majeure and send out a whole bunch of letters, respond to letters. And so this was a contractual theory that, we heard about in law school, and you put it into a contract as sort of nice to have boilerplate to fill it out, but nobody ever expects to actually use it. Whereas now it's like on the forefront of everybody's lips, and it's used all the time. And so now it is a big deal. So that was one of the major shifts that I saw from a legal standpoint early on, and that's kind of sustained, is the importance of force majeure in business dealings now.
And final question, did you find this impacted your management of outside counsel, or how did it impact your relationship with your counsel?
Well, we had relationships with our outside counsel from before, and they were very good about staying on top of things. And we've got software in place to be able to put, for example, on a patent side of things, put them in direct contact with our innovators. And so that really didn't change very much. And we have existing relationships with firms around the globe. And those didn't change very much. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that the decision to select outside counsel was really affected at all by COVID.
Well, that was wonderful. I thank all of you. And now I'd like to see if anybody in the Zoom audience does anybody have any questions? You can just put your question into chat, or you can unmute yourself, or let me know you want to unmute yourself so we can manage any questions. Okay, we have no questions. Joe, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll give it a minute to see if anybody has any questions, Allison, then they may be typing in. But I know that some of our panels have to run in 10 minutes here. So, if there are other questions, we'd love to answer them. But if not, I really wanted to thank Justin, Jessica, and Clark for agreeing to do this today. There was actually, for those of you that maybe put on CLAs in the past, there's a lot of prep work that goes into these things. We had several meetings and discussions, and had a lot of fun talking about how COVID has impacted everybody's business here. And I think that, I just wanted to say I really appreciate all of you for putting in time and effort to do that. Are there any other questions yet, Allison?
Nope, no other questions.
Well, actually, Allison, one question for you before we leave. You yourself are managing an in-house legal team. Why don't you, if possible, maybe give us a little rundown of how the COVID has affected your business, if at all? I think you've had some of the same challenges, and we've discussed some of that. So maybe you could offer a little bit of your guidance there.
Well, because my company because we're already remote. I mean, we have a unique setup. We were already set up to be remote. But I will say the number one impact that I'm seeing is actually perhaps not COVID related. It's really more of the data privacy and the security privacy issues that we have seen come out. For example, if you have remote workers and they're using their own laptops, right? What do you do with the data that's on their laptop? So a lot of the changes that I've seen in the last year are dealing with data privacy and security protocols. And business continuity plans. And these are things that are really bogging a lot of us down. But I think that's more technology than intellectual property related.
All right. If there's no more questions, again, thanks everybody for participating today, and really enjoyed having this and putting this on. So thank you one more time.
Ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude today's meeting. Thanks for joining and have a great afternoon.